Hello, everybody. I am so excited to be here today. And so today, what we're going to be taking a look at is, do your students hate radicals? Three tips. We're going to talk about 3 tips that are going to make them easier, not only for them to learn them, but for also for you to teach them. But before we get started, my name is Jeanette Stein, and I am so excited you're here today. If you could just take a minute, let me know where you're from. While you're doing that, I'm going to get my phone set up so I can see your awesome comments. And then I would also love to know, have you taught radicals yet this year? So what I thought would make it a little more easier than typing it in is just give me a little heart sign for a yes or a smiley sign for the no. And so if you could just let me know, have you started teaching radicals yet this year? If you're in 8th grade, Algebra 1, or reviewing them for geometry, and Algebra 2 as you build on that. So I'm really excited. I've got the comments open here, and so if you are here watching, I would love to see what you've got to say. So one more time, if you're just joining us, please let me know where you're from in the comments. I always love hearing from you. And we're going to talk about 3 tips to make radicals easier for them to understand, for them to go through, and for you to teach. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So the first thing I would love to remind you, and I know you know this, and I think that a lot of times we assume that our students know this, but radicals are nothing more than variables. So one time I had a student, she was a lovely girl. She was working really hard. Math was never her strongest suit. And she was came into high school in 9th grade and really impressed me because even though it wasn't her favorite and she didn't love it, she worked very, very hard to understand it. So when we got to radicals, she really didn't, she admitted to me, I didn't really pay attention in 8th grade, but I don't get what they are. And to me, well, they're a variable. They represent an irrational number. Square root of 2 is just what 2 numbers multiply to give you 2, but there is no exact number for that. So we just we made this symbol up so that we had something to call it. We made up this variable, kind of like we know that pi stands for 3.14, going on and on and on. It's irrational. And since it's irrational, we can't possibly write it all out. I had to come out, not me, but we had to, as a math community, come up with a way to represent that and be able to share it. Once she understood that it really was just a symbol that stood for another number, she really took off. And it wasn't like her brain was just really trying to process, what is it? What is it? She could not get over that. And so do your students, I would love to know, do your students understand that the radical sign, the square root sign, the cube root sign, means that it's a variable? So the square root of 2, square root of 3, the cube root of 7, do they understand that those are variables that represent a specific irrational number? Because if not, they might be so stuck in what is this, what does it mean, that they might not be able to move on. And sometimes because we know it so well as math teachers, we forget that very basic step. And that can be really huge. So the second thing I'd love to talk to you about is how to connect what we're learning to the previous learning. Now, some of this is really obvious after tip number 1. It's a variable. So we want to connect it to something they're really good at. So most kids come into my classroom at least, and they love combining like terms. So I'm going to pause. Do your kids know how to combine like terms? Do they know how to work with variables? Do they know that x times x is x squared? Or that x plus x is 2x? So if they do, then they know how to work with radicals once they understand that they're a variable. So connecting it to something that they've already been successful with and they already understand is really powerful. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn around and show you my computer screen because I would love to show you the activity that I like to do with this. Now if you are on my email list and you got this earlier, I noticed this link wasn't working. So if you go back in, it's working now. So we were able to get it fixed right away. So here is the screen, and hopefully if you're on my email list, you were able to come to this page and download everything, and you got the Algebra 1 activity. So if you got that activity, I've already got it loaded up here so that we don't have to wait. What I like to do is they should have learned this in 8th grade. And as you guys know, I spent most of my teaching has been in the Algebra 1 classroom. So what I would do is give them some examples and remind them of what we've done and have them look for the patterns if they've forgotten. So then what I do is, because a lot of my students, just a little side tip here, because a lot of my students are special ed, or they are dealing with, I had students who were legally blind, I had students who had processing issues. As you know, I worked with a lot of very unique learning situations, and I love that because I can bring that all back to you. But the inclination is to print these patterns along with the work they need to do back to back. Now, your struggling kids will struggle with the folding it back and forth. Your good learners, your learners who do not have any of those issues, they're not going to have a problem with it. They're going to be like, what's the big deal? We just flip it back and forth. Don't waste the paper. What I would actually do is print these half sizes so they could be on the same sheet of paper, one right next to the other. Because then those students who are a little bit slower with processing, being able to line it up, those with visual issues, reading issues, they're not going to run into that. But that was just a little side note. So then I like to go through, I don't go through these with them. When I love to have these activities that force them to kind of review what we know, use their own brains to look at the patterns on the other sheet and see what they can remember. Once we get them to remember and make these connections, it can be really, really powerful. So I'm wondering, do your students, will they remember how to do these very easy ones? Square root of 4, square root of 16. Now, some of yours will. And I would love to get even just one thumbs up or one comment on here. I'm wondering if it's just not showing up, but I think they do. And I know some people are on here. So if you could just let me know that my mic's working and all that good stuff, I would love it. But this is our activity that we have going. And it really does help them remember, because the kids will help each other to remember. Square root of 49. Okay, is obviously 7. Will they remember to cut these numbers in half? Do they remember why it happens? And so these things, this is a great activity. Once we go through the bell ringer, I love to do this activity before we get into even more of the rules that are more the Algebra 1 content. This really helps them to connect it back. So let's see if I can get this worked up again. So I would wonder for you, do your students make these connections? Do they connect that radicals are the same thing as combining like terms, or adding and multiplying, understanding those rules? And so if they do, you are going to have quite an advantage. So I'm talking at the camera and the camera's not on. So let me see if I can figure out how to go back and forth here. There we go. So I just wanted to share with you that one as well, because I think that activity can really help them to make those connections. The third tip I have for you is to begin each day or end each day by just reviewing these simple math facts. What's the cube root of 8? What's the square root of 16? And then get up into the ones, obviously, that they forget. It drives me crazy, but my students always forget square root of 1, because I do such a good job of reviewing all the rest, and then I forget that one. So I like to go through those simple cube roots. Cube root of 125, square root of 25. Like, I want them to see how these are all related, and if they can get those memorized, and if we can work on that every day, that way when you are assessing and we get into the rational exponents, you're not testing, do they know the cube root of 8, which is a simple memorization. Do they really truly understand what the negative sign means there, or what the rational exponent means there? So by going through each day and doing a little bit of mental math, you will really be set up for success. One thing I wanted to show you is how I like to start the day that I do these, just to get their minds thinking and making sure that I'm testing on what they actually do know. is I like to do a powers chart with them right in the beginning to make sure these numbers are familiar. Now, I like to print this off with 2 charts on one paper just to save paper. And I do have them keep these charts, depending on the student, out on their desk. So if I'm working with my ESL learners, my English as a second language, or ELL, English language learners, or if I'm working with some of my special ed students I had one student who had trauma to his brain. He had no short-term, like all these little facts we memorize, he didn't have, but the logic and the understanding was phenomenal. It was a very strange thing. It was really hard to deal with because you knew he was very smart, but he couldn't remember basic facts. He would forget simple 2 plus 3, but then be able to solve very complex equations. It was kind of crazy. So I would have him keep his sheet out on his desk, but we would fill this in, and they would have these numbers then fresh in their head. And if I had students that were really struggling, I had a class full of special ed students, we would do this at the beginning of every single hour. Every day they'd come in and we do this so the numbers are at their mind. And that way I'm testing, do they really understand exponents? Do they really understand radicals? Or am I just testing the math facts? Is that where they're getting stuck? So this allowed me to kind of move past some of those struggles that we've had. So I'd love to hear from you. Do you ever do math facts at the beginning or the end of the class to prepare them? So if so, that I just think it's a really powerful thing, and you're probably testing more of their deeper knowledge than you are of just the math facts. And I know it can be really frustrating when your kids are so dependent on the calculator, because it kind of stops working when we get into factoring and radicals. So thank you so much for joining. If you would like these handouts, these are completely free. On this Facebook post, there's a link right above me, I would think, depending on the device you're at. It should say something like free lesson radicals on that link. Go ahead and click that, and I will email you the complete lesson. You'll get all of these downloads absolutely free. We would love to work with you, and let me know if I can ever help. Again, my name is Jeanette Stein, and thank you so much for sharing a little bit of your Friday at the end of Halloween week with me today. I really appreciate your time. Have a great day.